Nick Wale has been helping me with my books for many years now, on and off. He's a tremendous promoter of books and is particularly well known in the Western genre. Recently he moved into the paranormal and horror space, so I thought it would be fun to spend an episode of The Magical World of G. Michael Vasey talking to Nick Wale about the efforts that he is making in publishing horror and paranormal books, and to have him share some of his own stories, because as we discover in this episode, everyone has a story. Nick?
You know, I'm a Western guy by trade, but we've recently moved into the paranormal supernatural side with some success. So I'm happy to share with you anything you need to know.
Yeah, so what made you, being a Western guy, and let's face it, you have been promoting my books on and off for many years, and mine are all definitely paranormal, certainly not Western. What was it that gave you the idea to do paranormal stuff as well? With a special imprint.
Well, we've had such a lot of success with on the Western side at DSP, Dusty Saddle. We wanted to try and expand into other markets because I didn't want to strictly be known as a Western guy. Western market's been very good to me, but there are other things out there that interest me, and the horror market and the paranormal market is one of them. So it was decided that we would add a whole new wing to the company and come up with a series of authors that we could publish and see what the trends were, see what would take off. We tried all different kinds of products, and now we're centering around creature feature, which is shown to be a major market we want to move into. Creature feature, of course, is the very much like the old B movies of the 50s with giant fish and crabs and stuff like that. That seems to be a big center for us, and it's straight in the middle of the horror market.
So sort of cryptozoology type stuff.
That's it. It seems to be a very big market that we're tapping into. We have 20 first wave of creature feature coming out next month, and we're looking forward to it very much.
And what's the strategy? Because you've got a number of authors signed up. I owe you a couple of bucks.
You do, and that's it. You know, I'm here today to beat them out of you.
So how does it work if someone was interested in maybe trying to join this group of writers?
Well, the company is called RavenTale, and it's run by a very talented person who has been slowly building and looking through authors and has been having some very good success finding people. You would visit the website, which is raventale.com, raventalepublishing.com. I'm sure you can drop the link in. And you would submit a manuscript, and it would be an average submission process where your work would be read, and if it fitted what we needed, you would be contacted for an interview, a meeting, and then we could offer you a contract if we choose to go forward, and if you choose to go forward, of course.
Yeah. And how does it differ from other publishing contracts or other publishing arrangements, and how does it differ from publishing on your own, so to speak?
Well, the big thing about it is that with the average publishing company, you are working with a publishing company that may be a startup or maybe a company that works with a specific set of ideals in mind. This isn't a company that has a specific set of ideals in mind. We have a Western side, which is doing very well for us, and we're using Western profits to build a horror imprint and a romance imprint. And that means that we have financial freedom that a lot of companies don't have. We can try new things and take punts on things, and it's not make it or break it for us to have a few trial and error projects along the way. So it's very much a case of being able to use what's worked on the Western side, which is a heavy promotion, Amazon advertising, all kinds of Facebook advertising, and all of those kinds of things that have worked for our Westerns on our horror product without having to be completely sure of every product that's going to be a success. We can try different things and kind of build our own game plan as we go along. And I think that's the fun of it. That there are a lot of publishers out there who have a very staunch policy of what they will take and what they won't take. We're interested in seeing all of it. Now, we won't take it, perhaps, but we're interested in seeing all of it because you really don't know. Creature came to us by accident. We had an author called Michael Cole that we signed. Creature came to it, and he took off and selling very well for us. So Creature came to us by accident. What else should come to us by accident? You know, we had a very good paranormal memoir by Andy Hopkins that did very well for us. You know, the medium. So there's no real set standard of what we're looking for. We're building the standard as we go along, and I think that's what makes it stand out.
Yeah, yeah, it's a bit like when we did the Black Eyed Kids book after all the ghost story books, and something just clicked and it took off. Yeah,
yeah, and I think
and then it dragged all the other stuff with it, basically.
And that's it. I think that the big thing about the publishing business has always been having a lot of different things on the market and being able to successfully find different kinds of authors to work and build variety, a catalog of variety. And once that catalog of variety has been built, you can see what will be popular with the readership. It's all about trial and error, and then you can find other products like the ones that have taken off.
Well, give us an idea of who you've got signed up and what kind of books they're putting out. I know, we'll start with Andy. I know Andy. In fact, I wrote the introduction thing for him, didn't I?
You did indeed. Andy is a psychic from Colville, England, and he had unsettling experiences as a kid.
Had him on this show, actually.
You did, and he enjoyed it. He wants to come on again.
Oh, well,
I said to him, you should go over and bang on Gareth's door. I said, go chase him down, because he's a very interesting story. His book is a really harrowing story, very similar to, not in content, but very similar kind of themes to the Amityville Horror, in the sense that he had all these diabolical things going on inside this house, and he has a degree of psychic talent. So he's been able to pick up on it, and it was about his growing up in the 1980s, 1970s, and experiencing these things, the television exploding and spirits attacking him in bed and all kinds of stuff. And that was a very big success. He had quite a bit of coverage on that one, newspapers and et cetera, very popular. We have an author over there at RavenTale called Michael Cole. Now, Michael Cole, he writes about sea creatures, you know, giant dolphins and fish and crabs and all kinds of things, killer sea creatures. And he's been a phenomenal success. Every book he's put out has been a phenomenal success. And we signed him up, and he's writing, he's just finished an 88,000 word book, which apparently is the best thing he's ever done. And he's working on another one right now. And he's just phenomenally successful with the market. And of course, we have picked up several, a guy called Ezekiel Kincaid, who is an incredibly interesting writer. He writes about the paranormal, about the satanic. I believe it's the satanic. That's how he would describe it. The satanic elements, and it's a really interesting thing. So we're trying to pick up people from across the spectrum. And with the creature features, we've actually been using a lot of Western authors to write the creature features because it's very nostalgic for them, you know, from the 1950s. So we've been working on that creature feature thing, and we're going to do that in 3 waves. A first wave will be the introduction wave, and then 2 more waves later this year. We should have nearly 100 creature feature products on the market by the end of this year, which may very well put us in the market lead.
Yeah, absolutely. And did you ever come up with the Western's paranormal crossover?
No, I never did. I could never find a Western author who would be able to do it. They never wanted to get, never wanted to get into it. And a horror author might not have the expertise in the Western market to be able to make it work.
Yeah. Well, you encouraged me to have a go, and I could never quite, I can't write a Western.
I'm sure you could, though. You've lived in Texas. I'm sure you could do a good job with it.
Yeah, well, we'll see.
You never know. I mean, I'm sure you could. The thing is, though, somebody's going to pick up on that. It's going to be a great success. I mean, Western is a very popular market for us, and it always has been. You know, our company holds a large portion of the market, and that market just continues to keep. It's very steady, and we just continue to keep pace and growing and picking new talent. The Western side is a really well trod road for us. I mean, it's really a booming market, and we enjoy it.
So, talking about paranormal, what kind of paranormal experiences have you had? Everybody's got a story. That's my tagline.
Well, when I was a kid, we lived in the middle of the countryside in the Midlands, not far from where Andy Hopkins lived, actually. And we lived in the middle of the countryside, and the house next door to us, there were 2 houses together in the middle of the countryside. And the next door neighbors would be up in the middle of the night saying there were footsteps running up and down the stairs and all kinds of things going on. And what had happened in the 1920s, years before we'd lived there, the guy next door had killed his family in the house. And they didn't believe it to begin with. They didn't believe it. Lots of people had lived there and had warned them about it. Don't live in that house. It's a bit weird. It's a strange house.
Yeah.
And they moved in. And I was very good friends with the boy who lived next door. And he said to me, every night I wake up, there's a very mad gentleman who's staring down at me. And I said to him, I said, really? He says, yes. And I tell my dad, and my dad tells me that it's not, I'm making it up, it's a dream. And every night I wake up and the guy is peering down at me and he's red-faced and he's angry. And I said to him, I said, well, what are you going to do about it? He says, well, not much. My parents won't listen to me. And they didn't listen to him. No dogs would go in that house. No, not even, they didn't even have problems with things like insects or any kind of wildlife. Nothing would go in that house. This was the middle of the countryside. Nothing could go near that house. They had a babysitter over one time who went home early because she said that the kids were driving her crazy, running up and down the stairs and pulling her hair from behind the couch. The television would never stay on the same channel. I used to hear the father screaming at the kids that they were turning the television over on him in the middle of the night, and they weren't. And the strangest thing of all was my father was an agricultural worker, and he and one of his friends or one of his co-workers were coming back from late night harvesting, and they went past our house, and there's a yard in front of our house, and they saw this little girl walking around on the front of the house. And my father says, I wonder who that belongs to, that kid. And the other guy says, oh, I have no idea. Well, they were talking with the farm manager, and he says, oh, I've seen that girl hundreds of times. That's the daughter of the guy who killed the family. She wanders around the yard. The boy next door that I was friends with started sleepwalking.
Good Lord.
In much the same pattern as that boy. They used to find him outside. I never saw the girl, but you always knew you were being watched out front. You always felt you were being watched. The hairs on the back of your head would stand up. It was a very interesting experience. Our house was completely normal, but that house next door was crazy. The radio would come on in the middle of the night. You'd have the music coming on. The car alarms would go off. The mother-in-law of the family came to stay, and she said that she was pushed out of bed. It was an incredible thing. But what was so interesting is that, it was such an interesting experience. I've always thought that was a really clear indication of life after death, of a soul who's tormented on earth.
It's a shame you can't get your friend or whoever to write a book about it.
It is a shame. I was thinking about that the other day. He was a nice kid. I don't even know. He might not be with us still, but he was a nice kid, and he swore blind. He swore blind that every night he would wake up and see this guy, very angry-looking man, looking down at him in the bed, in his bed. And you'd hear footsteps on the stairs. You'd hear the father get up in the middle of the night and shout to the kids, stop running up and down the stairs. Stop running up and down the stairs. The door would bang. It was a very interesting. They tried always to get the dog to go into that house. They tried dragging it and pushing it, and it would not go in. It would not go in that house. So I've often believed that there's something obviously very strange was going on there.
Yeah. It sounds... it sounds like a really good paranormal investigation to be done.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that I remember happening. One night, the mother of the house came around to my parents and said, can I stay around here for a little bit? The kids are at my mother's house, and can I stay with you and watch television? And my father says, well, we're about to have dinner, but you can go on through. My mother goes in with a tea and some biscuits, and she says, a knife flew from one side of the room to the other and clattered against the wall.
Good Lord.
And my mother says, oh, I can't believe that. They were very much in the case of, oh, I can't believe that. But that's what they claimed. I mean, that was the situation they claimed. It was a very interesting, it was kind of interesting. You could hear when things were going on there because the walls were paper thin.
So but it always amazed element to it as well, by the sound of it.
I think so. I think it was very angry. And I think, it was a funny thing though, Gary, I'll tell you this. Before they'd moved in, a little old lady had lived there by herself, and she had no issues whatsoever with it. She was there. She was a little old lady. She knew what happened there. She was only living there while she was waiting for somewhere else to open up. This was maybe a year, and she didn't see anything happen there. She loved it. When they moved in, it all started. I think it had something to do with the fact maybe kids were in the house
Yeah, yeah,
because yeah.
yeah. Could do, and that would definitely explain the poltergeist aspect to it, which is usually to do with kids. Yeah,
Because I remember asking the little old lady myself, we knew she lived in town. I said, when you lived in that house, did anything strange happen with the television? And she said, no, not at all. She said, it was a nice house. I enjoyed it very much. And as soon as they moved in, all these strange incidents were happening. And it never came through to our house at all. You know, it never came through the
yeah.
wall. We never saw anything. Never had any incidents on our side. But next door, it was every day. It was every day.
Hmm. Interesting stuff, and yeah, sounds like a great story for one of my books too.
I've often thought it was a great. I've often wished they would have paranormal investigators go to that house because
Yeah.
it was a strange incident, and it was one of those stories that I think there's a lot to it. And you know, it was a funny thing because they buried the guy who killed his family because he committed suicide. His wife had
Yeah.
died of influenza or something, and then he smothered his daughter and shot himself through the head. And a lot of the older people in my town knew the crime very well. And they'd say, well, we went down and there's blood running underneath the door because he killed himself in the kitchen and the blood would run
Yeah.
into the street. And I remember the verger in our hometown saying, I was on a school trip to the graveyard to look at the church, you know, and they took us on a school trip. And I said to the verger, he knew my parents, and he said, you know, the guy who lived next door to you is buried in an unmarked grave just down there, just outside of the church graveyard, because they couldn't bury him in consecrated
Yeah.
ground. And he says he's buried down there. And he says, and they grassed him over in 1930. They grassed him over, and the grass would never grow on top of him. It would never grow on top of him. It's there. We have to put artificial grass down or put plants, and the plants die. He says he's right down there. So, you know, it was an interesting thing growing up in a town where everybody knew everything that had happened. You know,
Yeah.
it's a small town.
Yeah.
And so there's lots of interest. It was fascinating, yes. And then there was the poor woman one day that came to our house, and she said that she'd seen in front of our house there was a battle, a big battle. It was a battlefield, and she'd seen a headless knight thrown across the field. And she said, "Could I have a drink of water?" My mother says, "Yeah, sure." She was an American, and she says, "Can I have a drink of water?" And my mother says, "Yeah, sure." She gets a drink of water, and she says, "You'll never believe what I've seen." And my mother says, "Try me. I tell me it's going to be something like a knight or a monk or something." She says it's a headless knight, and my mother says, the amount of people who were told her that story about the headless knight, this headless knight went across the field. It was a very interesting one. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me of a story my dad used to tell me. It's in one of the books somewhere where he was you know, in his late teens, just post-war. So they'd go cycling every weekend and take their tents and camp just to get out of Hull, which was still a bomb-damaged, you know, mess. And they'd cycle up towards York, and there was a big battle up by York, Battle of what was it, something Bridge, and they pitched their tent in this field, and you know it got dark, and they went to bed. And about 2 o'clock in the morning, they woke up, and they thought that what they were listening to at first was maybe some horses running around the field. And they're looking puzzled at each other because, you know, there weren't any horses in the field when they put the tent up, and it was anyway dark. And then it got worse because they could hear steel on steel and screams and blood-curdling yells. He said they sat there, you know, with the flashlights or whatever, and they wouldn't look outside the tent until the sun came up. And of course, when they looked outside, there was nothing there.
Oh, that must have been that...
it's the Civil War Battle of something, Stamford Bridge. Stamford Bridge. And they realised that they camped on the battleground, Stamford Bridge battleground, yeah.
Well, you know, they say that one of those Civil War battles that was started to reenact itself only months after the battle itself, because the king sent an observer down to see this battle being replayed, and they saw it being replayed in front of him. And they reported back and said, yeah, it was replaying itself. So you can only imagine the violence that was taking place in that. Well, I'll tell you something else I remember as well. You know, it's a funny thing. When I was a kid, a woman came down in her car and said she'd run somebody over. And she needed a policeman to go down and look to see who she'd run over, because she knew she'd hit somebody with a car.
Right.
And we were sitting there listening. The policeman came over and said, "Oh, what's the problem?" She says, there was a man dressed in a cavalier outfit who stepped out in front of my car, and I hit him. He must have been going to a fancy dress party." And the policeman says, "No, I've heard that one 100 times. We've been down there. There's no cavalier. There's a hunting lodge not far off, and obviously, and you didn't. There's nothing there. There's just a hunting lodge down there, and obviously, and we used to hear all the time. Oh, I thought people would report that maybe 20 times a year. It was in the local.
It sounds to me like you've got a book in you yourself, mate.
Well, I was very interested as a kid. I was terrified of it, but I took notice of it. We lived in the rural area, and everybody knew everybody. And for instance, I can tell you another one. The local vicar said he'd said that he'd had a young married couple come to him, and they wanted to get married. A young unmarried couple, I apologize, wanted to get married. And they said, but they didn't want him to do the ceremony. They wanted the older vicar to do the ceremony. And he says, "What older vicar?" They said, "The very old, nice gentleman who showed us around the church and everything." He said, "There isn't. I'm the only vicar here. There's myself and a lay vicar." And he said, No. We were here last week, and we met with an older gentleman, and he showed us around the church, and he took our details, and he said that he would let us know when there was a spot available." He said, there isn't another. There is another one. Well, let me show you around the church. You're obviously mistaken. You must have been somewhere else in the vicinity. And they went around. They saw the pictures of all the old guys on the wall, or the old vicars. They said, "Oh, it's that one. He died in 1949, Gary." And obviously he fancied showing this young unmarried couple around.
Yeah.
Still
working.
Still working, and apparently as large as life. They say that he was very happy, very jovial, completely solid, was smoking the whole time. It was smoking, was perfectly amenable. Obviously, and obviously completely unaware that he was dead, completely able to answer questions. It's a weird one, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But there's lots of weird stories. I mean, you helped me out with the website collecting stories, so you've seen a lot of them.
I have. It's
very
amazing.
Strange and bizarre instances. So I like collecting the stories. Unfortunately, these days, that kind of a website doesn't do as well as it used to because of Facebook and Reddit and all that kind of stuff. But it still gets the odd story or two. Keeps me occupied.
Well, I think it does. It's an interesting thing, because there used to be a very good website called True Online Paranormal Tales, and they used to have hundreds of them. Every day they'd post some more, and it was a fantastic site. And I don't know where it disappeared to.
Well, because people don't go to that kind of a website anymore. They go to Facebook or Reddit, and they have a group and they post all of that stuff there. It's a bit sad, really. Social media has kind of killed off a lot of small niche websites that were serving a nice purpose. And
it's a shame, because I think a digest of stories is very. I mean, you might not get an answer to every story, but if you put enough incidents together, you can put a pretty convincing case for hundreds of different incidents, and it's a very interesting thing. I think that one of the things that I do think is interesting is I think the number of people who are reporting or have had incidents, who are open-minded to incidents or open-minded to the things they're seeing is much better than it was. I think a lot of people used to ignore it or deride it, and I think that it has become a public consciousness thing, that people are aware that there is a something beyond dying and being in the ground, a soul adventure, and these people for some reason do not go to be wherever they need to go next. They stay around, and if we could see the things that are going on in front of our eyes, I think we'd be quite amazed.
Well, it always amuses me, and I've had this conversation with one or two people, where you still see people that are really, science, and black and white and materialistic and adamant. Yeah. There's no afterlife. Ricky Gervais, even writes it into Afterlife. His views on there's no such thing as ghosts, there's no life after death, this kind of thing. And yet, if you read into science, and particularly look at something like quantum mechanics and quantum physics, You don't need any more explanation for a lot of these phenomena than that. Parallel universes, multiverses, very strange phenomena with particles, time behaving in strange ways. I mean, once you get into quantum mechanics and quantum physics, it's very easy to start to realize that all of this stuff is theoretically and scientifically possible. And to say that science, you're sort of doing old wives' tales, and it's not, there's no science to support it, is actually nonsense.
Well, it's a funny thing, it's like there was a guy called Michael Newton who wrote a very good book called Journey of Souls. I don't know if you ever read it, but it was a very good book. He was a
Hmm.
psychologist, and he would hypnotize these people and take them into past lives. And he did
Yeah.
thousands and thousands of cases,
Yes.
and it always happened the same way. People would die and go to this place where they would be met by their soul team or whatever you want to call it, and then they would go through the process of re-energizing, and then they would pick another life and go to another life. Now he's a credible psychologist who had a skill for hypnotism. He wrote a very credible book with as much evidence as he could put into it, accounts and sources and all kinds of stuff. And he made a very credible story. And I don't know how many times people have to be given the information that, and of course, all the work into past lives and all the work into, the fact that energy can't be destroyed, it has to go somewhere,
Yeah.
and all the things. I agree with you. I mean, I really think people must be terrified in some cases of considering the greater picture. But in my opinion, it's nice to know that this isn't it. And
Yeah, I agree with you.
this is not the end of the whole situation. You get to do something else, be
Yeah, I
something
mean,
else.
I was looking away there because I was trying to remember the author Anthony Peake. Have you read any of his
I
material?
have, yes.
And he uses combination of quantum mechanics, physics, psychology, psychoanalysis, everything he can use from a scientific perspective to actually come up with ideas about what life after death is. And of course, he has this idea that in fact you live one life and then
Yeah,
you kind of relive it over and over again. And it has this nice little model where the analogy with playing an arcade game where you have all these lives and
yeah,
you meet the boss, the level boss, and you die.
yeah,
And then you play again and you die and you play again and eventually you get past that level boss and you're into new territory. So he's got the idea of, there's two parts to you. There's the part that's in the game
yeah,
that will die, and there's the other part that's controlling you, that's seen some of this before, lived this before, and learned. And so you're constantly reliving your own life, but it's different each time because you're following a slightly different path and hopefully learning from lessons that you had in previous lifetimes. I mean, I don't know. I did some past life regression in Houston with a hypnotherapist, and I did some past life regression in Houston with a husband of a work colleague and friend. And I'll tell you, it really shocked me because I was sat in this chair and I meditate, you know that,
oh yeah,
and it just felt to me like a bit of a guided meditation. I'd never been hypnotized before, so I had no idea what to expect. And to be honest, I was a bit disappointed because I was thinking, well, this is a bit weird because I'm just nicely relaxed and I'm meditating essentially. And he just said to me out of the blue, he says, look down at your feet, take yourself back to another life and now look down at your feet. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, right. So in my mind's eye, I looked down at my feet. And to my utter amazement, there were two dirty, wrecked feet in leather sandals. And he says, what do you see? I started giggling. And he says, no, don't do that. He says, just relax. What do you see? He says, now, what else are you dressed in? And I said, well, I'm wearing a dress, sort of leather thing with like thongs. Wait a minute, I'm a soldier. And I had this whole, he took me through this whole lifetime as this lonely, miserable, sort of early 40s, hardened Roman soldier, Greek guy, joined the Legion, no family, no marriage, no kids, no friends, just this, harsh life, going around brutally murdering people for a living.
And it's the same thing. Before a while ago, I was introduced to a person who did hypnotherapy, and she said, "Would you like to have one?" And I said, "Well, fine, I'll have one." And it was during the middle of the COVID epidemic, so I did it. We did it via Zoom or Skype, and I did the same thing. I sat there and we went up the steps and down the steps and all that kind of stuff, and stepped out into it. And I thought to myself, "This is not working.
Yeah,
This is not working." Well, actually, when I got into it, she kept on going and kept on going, and I thought I fell asleep, but I didn't fall asleep because she said I was talking through the whole thing.
right.
I woke up with an extremely sore throat, and she sent me the recording, and the recording was a boy in one of the Southern American states who was walking around barefooted in the woods and wanted to run away from home, all this kind of stuff. And I went through a number of other things, and it was an amazing. Honestly, 5 hours, or it was 5 hours, I think, or 4 hours, and I felt I slept through the whole thing. I didn't remember anything until I got the "now you can come back."
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, honestly, I was looking to play along a bit because I didn't want to hurt the poor woman's feelings.
Yeah, that's what I felt like. Oh, I'll just pretend a little bit because not pretend to make something up, but pretend to be more deeper
Yeah,
asleep than I really was. And so when he said, "Look down, and what do you see?" And I looked down, and I'm like, okay, I see a pair of feet, dirty feet in sandals and gravel underneath, And then all of a sudden I'll look around and I'm in this completely different world. It was bizarre.
it is bizarre, and
Yeah,
and at the end of it, the lady said to me, "What did you think?" I said, "Well, I have all of I really don't remember anything about it." She says, "Oh, that's good." I said, "Oh, okay then." And then I listened to the recording, and it's amazing to me. In fact, in many ways, it creeps me out a bit, Gary, because this record, I don't remember anything about it. It's a little
yeah,
bit like, I mean, I recognize it when I listen to it, but I don't remember saying the words. I don't remember anything about it. And it
yeah,
took me a few days to ponder it because I had to sit there and think, where did this come from? I'm not a person who's very susceptible,
yeah,
to being
yeah,
led into anything. She wasn't leading either. You could hear her questions on it. And she said, she was asking things like, "How do you feel? Where are you? What do you see?" Nothing along the lines of, leading people. Are you rich? Are
yeah,
you poor? She was
yeah,
saying things like, "What did the clouds look like?" No, she wouldn't say, she was saying things like, "And what does the sky look like? Or what does the ground look like? What color are the
yeah,
leaves?"
yeah.
Very good. The lady was extremely good. And that's one of the books that Andy Hopkins has coming out, is a past life book, and he's
Oh,
got a
really?
series of things in
Cool.
his new book about past lives that he's helped people get through and go through, and it's a very interesting thing. He's a jack of all trades, is Andy Hopkins. I tell you, he'll have a go at
Yeah.
anything.
Have you got any authors or any manuscripts on more of the UFO side, or is it strictly paranormal horror?
At the moment, it's paranormal horror, a lot of fiction, but we're interested in non-fiction. But the UFO side fascinates me. I was always interested in UFOs, and I think that they have more of a connection to the paranormal
Yeah.
aspects
Yeah,
than
me too.
I think they have more. I mean, I think people kind of say, well, the UFOs are here and the paranormal's here. I don't think so. I think it's all connected, and I think it's all part of the whole same thing. And I I, I think there's a very convincing case for UFOs as well.
That's why I wondered if you'd had any, because I think I've always tried to stay very focused on the ghosts and ghoulies and stuff like that, and sort of not do the UFO stuff because it seems to be a whole different genre, and yeah, it's not really me. But just recently, I've gotten to the point where I actually begin to wonder if they aren't one and the same thing. I don't know if you saw that series, independent film series, that there was a couple of series of it, and gosh, I cannot remember the name of it for the life of me. It was just a single word, but it was someplace in North America where they went off to investigate.
Roswell.
No, not Roswell. No, no. They went off to investigate. It was the name of a town, and they went off to investigate these little creatures that somebody was reporting coming out of caves in the ground in the Appalachians. And they pretty soon got dragged into sort of the whole UFO side of things. And so I enjoyed the series immensely, and I will post it in the notes below because it's worth watching if you haven't seen it.
Well, I'll tell you, there was a very interesting story. The Appalachian aspect is fascinating. Um, Also, the mountain ranges in Pennsylvania, they have a lot of incidents that happen there. Bigfoot sightings, all kinds of strange winged creatures. There's lots of reports in. I mean, America's such a vast, uncharted place that it's really quite fascinating. There's also a mountain range in Arizona, I think, where they say that people have seen all kinds of odd stuff going around.
Yeah, I just looked it up. The show's called Helier. If you haven't seen it,
Ah, hell yeah, I will check
Helier.
that out.
Yeah, it's a two. There's two series of it already, and it's really pretty good. And in that they sort of conjoin the living underground creatures with aliens and alien abduction and all kinds of stuff like that, and get into disappearances, a la the books by that author that we always wonder how she does so well.
Oh, absolutely. Well, that's always been it's always been a pleasant thing for us to look at, hasn't it? And
Yeah,
hasn't it, Gary?
yeah.
But I think there's so much out there we don't know, and I think it all connects together. I think the past life and the UFO and the strange incidents that took place in my hometown, every other hometown around the world.
Everybody's
Um,
got a story. I mean, I sort of use that as my tagline. But everybody's got a story. I mean, you start. I'm a collector of stories, and if I start talking to people, even the most hardened, hard-nosed, there's no such thing as ghosts. They've
yeah,
always got a story.
yeah.
Always something that happened to them or their mother or some member of family. Everybody's got a story.
Well, the thing that amazes me is that even, I mean, and it's amazing to me how people categorize their stories. For instance, a very religious gentleman said to me, I saw an angel when I was a child. I saw an angel stand at the bottom of my bed, smoking a Camel cigarette. And another person would say, well, I saw a man standing there looking down at me with a red face.
Yeah,
And another person will say, well, I saw a puff of smoke, or it's amazing to me how many different people categorize it in different ways and don't automatically call it paranormal. For
yeah,
instance, take that haunting down in London, the Enfield haunting, that
yeah,
Bigfoot haunting. How would an older couple who'd moved into that house have categorized those same incidents rather than the young kids and the mother? It's an interesting thing how people. I often wonder that if we all got on the same page about what these things are, these incidents are, we'd have so much in the way of significant comprehensive reporting and being able to match things up, and just like
yeah.
they did, like that the guy did with Michael Newton did with his lives. He was able to interview thousands of people, thousands of them, and get a huge amount of reporting together for books. And I'm sure not every life was exciting.
Well, what you're talking about there is just how the way you look at the world and the way you've been brought up and the culture that you come from colors your perceptions of what reality is. So the old hag to one person is maybe an angel to another,
That's
depending
it.
on what your perception is. Yeah, yeah,
That's it. I mean,
yeah,
that's it. And the family member. I mean, the other thing that kind of is interesting about it is some people have no incidents, but they hear about incidents. And some people obviously don't have any incidents. Some people see a family member. Some people see a complete stranger. It really is interesting who sees and who doesn't see, and who believes and who doesn't believe. And for instance, I personally believe the last house I lived in was haunted, and I had a very good time, and I enjoyed that house very much. But it was old. It was 400, 500 years old. It was a very old house, and they'd recently renovated it before we moved in. And at night you could almost feel the people in there, and other people would live there and have no incidents whatsoever.
Well, it's funny because in the last year or so, I've gotten into the energy lines and dowsing and been trying to map these energy lines and understand them and work with them. And I won't go into much detail except to say that in a couple of instances, I've slept in places where the energy line runs through the bedroom.
Yeah.
And I really now think there's something to house healing and looking at home energies and stuff like that, because these sleeping in one of those lines can make a huge difference to how you sleep, dream, what experiences you have. Just absolutely amazing. So I can well imagine where houses get atmospheres not just because of who's lived there and the resonance that they've left of their personality and their troubles and happiness, but also because of some of the earth energies, negative and positive, that are all around us and pass through our homes and interact with us in ways that we still don't really understand.
Sometimes you can enter a house and it's such a heavy feeling, and
Yeah,
sometimes it's an interesting thing. I mean, I do think you're onto something with those lines, and I think that again, that's something that really could be explained in a more mainstream and wider and more comprehensive way, and people could probably use it to their benefit a lot.
yeah,
And I think there's so much we can use. For instance, meditation.
yeah,
Meditation, I think, is an amazing thing. Just if only for the fact you're sitting there and doing nothing for a few minutes
yeah,
with your body. You are just sitting there inside yourself or outside of yourself, enjoying without noise, without people talking at you. I'm in the job of advertising and promoting books. I'm talking to people all day long, and sometimes I tell you, it was the weirdest sensation when I took up meditation, because I wasn't talking or thinking or waiting for a call or waiting for this or that or even looking at my email. It was very difficult to get into it. But when I did, it put a whole new perspective on the work, because when you've seen what quiet is, you enjoy being busy and the rest of it. So I find meditation to be incredibly important. And where you meditate, sometimes you can meditate in one place and it will be okay, and then you can meditate in another part of the house and it would be the most mind-blowing experience you could have. And that has to be, as you were saying about the power lines, that has to help.
yeah.
Where you are meditating is what's feeding you.
Yeah, in fact, we've been working on this major energy line that passes through the Czech Republic. I've made a few videos about it already, and we've discovered a couple of places where these energy lines cross, and there's a vortex actually within the church under the arch in this particular church in a place called Jindřichův Hradec. And if you go meditate there, wow, it's like plugging your guitar into a 1,000-watt amplifier.
And you see that, and I always thought Czech Republic was a pretty magical place in terms of its
Yeah,
connection. It's interesting because when I was there, I always thought that it was a place that was filled with energy, very, very
yeah,
close to its core. And I
yeah,
think that, and I think England is too, but I think it gets kind of lost in the translation of a very, busy environment. But I think Czech Republic is quite magical, and of course the history of the country backs
yeah,
that up, I think,
yeah.
in a lot of ways.
Unfortunately, unlike the UK, a lot of the history's been lost because the Slavs didn't record anything in writing. So a lot of it's been lost, and that's a shame, because I've been looking at Slavic archaeological sites and how these lines interplay with them. And every single church, even if it's just the archaeological outline, an energy line goes through the church. And so the Slavs plainly either were aware purposefully or coincidentally of these lines and built these churches to take advantage of that energy as they became Christianized. So yeah, it's fascinating stuff. I am working on the book Peripheral People, on and off.
Pretty great
I'm well
release.
aware that you will be looking for it. I still have some work to do, but eventually you'll get it.
That's fine. We'll put it out. I'm very excited about that one. I think that I'm very glad that we found the creature feature aspect, because I think that's going to be a very large market
Yeah,
and will allow people to indulge. And I think that there's a lot of horror sides, and I do think non-fiction titles are one thing I'm very interested in getting into, because everybody, a research title, a reference title, as we've
yeah,
discussed in this call, how many non-fiction books have we mentioned? They're really useful to people. People enjoy them. And as I say, the Hopkins book was a very good seller. It was a very
yeah.
strong seller, and people really enjoyed it.
It's funny because
So I can't see why they wouldn't enjoy Peripheral People or anything else. I mean,
yeah, I mean, I really ought to try to get it out because my last book, which came out, I don't know, this time last year, Watch from the Shadows, is still doing really well. I don't know if you've noticed. It's still up there in the. It's
I
routinely in
haven't
the
noticed
top
it.
20 of the category it's in. I don't know why. It just keeps selling and selling and selling. So
Your stuff is always so popular, though, isn't it? I mean, in the sense that it's well researched, it's lots of content, and you know what you're talking about.
thanks.
You know,
Right. So, if someone was interested in potentially writing a book, fiction or non-fiction, or they
yeah.
simply wanted to take a look at what you're doing and what books you're putting out, how would they get that information?
All they have to do is go over to RavenTalePublishing.com, and they can look at the website. They can submit. They can read the blog. They can look at the author list, and they can learn everything about the company over there. And if they would be interested in the Western side, then, and I'm sure some people would be interested in the Western side, although
Yeah.
everybody loves a good Western, all they have to go to is dspublishingnetwork.com and do the same thing. And we are foremost a Western publisher, and we've had a lot of success with that side. But we are keen to make the horror side and find the key to making the horror side as successful as the Westerns, because it can be done. And I don't think anybody yet has reached the full potential of the Western commercially. Not the Western, of the horror novel commercially,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to be done. There's lots of critically acclaimed horror novels, but I have yet to see, I don't think we've seen the full potential yet. What can be done in the horror market, the paranormal market.
Sounds great, Nick. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Oh, you're so welcome, Gary. It's a pleasure to talk to you as always, and thank you for having me on the show.
So my thanks to Nick Wale. I think that was a very entertaining episode of the Magical World of G. Michael Vasey podcast. This is G. Michael Vasey saying thank you for listening. Thank you to Nick for joining me. You'll find a lot of information about Nick and his publishing companies in the notes that accompany this podcast. Please do like, share, and subscribe to this podcast wherever you consume it. Once again, thank you for listening. Goodbye.